just give everyone, including myself here, a minute to get situated and bring back that chat and Q&A window. Okay. And I am assuming that this is working well and that everyone can see the screen containing some snowballs. It says keeping discussions rolling. Sean did a very nice job of introducing us, so thank you very much for that, Sean. My name is Liz, and also presenting with us is John Reagan, and together we are the Quality Assurance team at CCC Online. First of all, I want to thank everybody for your time this lovely Friday afternoon. It's nice to be here with you, and so welcome, and I hope you enjoy this webinar. The Quality Assurance team at CCC Online has the role of completing the QA reports and also working with the chairs and the deans and training and professional development, all with the goal of improving the online class experience for our students. And in this presentation, we plan on suggesting some tips to keep your own discussions rolling along. And the premise really is that sometimes we all have discussions where the students aren't, they're tending not to talk much and not to say much. And so for times like that, it's nice to have a bag of tricks. And so that's one thing that we'd like to accomplish today. Also, toward the end, we will certainly ask everybody for your own ideas, what works for you in discussion. We would love to have your feedback and your comments along the way and at the end. And just so you know, this presentation is organized by the beginning of a discussion, the middle of a discussion, and the end of a discussion. So, just a reminder, and the quote at the top is from CCC Online's website, but this is just a little graphic so that everybody can keep in mind that CCC Online is a service organization delivering courses to 13 land colleges, and this is why our attention to quality instruction is so relevant and important. Obviously, the colleges must be assured that their students are getting a quality online experience, and we find that discussions are a visible way to observe the e-classroom. And so just wanted to start out with that. And also I wanted to touch on this, the CCC Online Quality Assurance Rubric, and we do assume that you all, and I can see from the names, I recognize you as having, most of you have taught maybe with us for at least a little while. So I do believe that you are familiar with the rubric, but just to touch on this a bit, the rubric categories that are most relevant to this presentation, and I included the link there that will go directly to our threaded discussion rubric. But the timeliness and presence, these are two things that certainly are relevant to this presentation. And just as a refresher, for a mark of good, timeliness, it means that the instructor is usually responding to student posts within 48 hours. And then best practices that's very consistent. And then the presence is that the instructor, again, a mark of good is that the instructor is regularly posting 3 separate days out of the week. So those are two categories that are, I think, of great relevance to this presentation. The best mark in presence is if the instructor posts 4 to 5 days a week, and certainly there are instructors who are on posting every single day. Engagement and re-engagement, that's another category on the rubric that is relevant. And again, with the good in engagement just means that the instructor's posts are regularly re-engaging the students through additional questions, and those can be at the same or higher level. And in this presentation, we will be giving you some ideas. If you're a little unsure, or you feel like the well is dry with the kind of questions you're asking your students. So that's engagement. And then the last 3, just the general interaction quality, is that the instructor is regularly interacting with all the students, both on an individual and sometimes even a group basis or a several student small group basis as appropriate. Acknowledgement, the student is acknowledging that the students understand the content. And by the way, that also means if the students are not understanding the content and they're not getting it, and they're not on the right track, acknowledgement that that is the case is also, of course, valid. And then additional post is just that the instructor is adding additional information and directing the conversation along the way. So I just wanted, I wanted to start the presentation with that. And if there's any questions, by the way, let me know. Okay. So at this point, I would like to go ahead and hand the microphone over to John Reagan, and we'll take you through. We're just going to take turns going through the presentation. And again, if any of you have questions or comments as we go, we'd like to hear from you too.
Let me check and see if my microphone is working and if sound is coming through to all of you.
Yes.
Great. I too want to say thanks to all of you for being here in this presentation today and taking time to listen to the material that Liz and I want to pass along to you. One of the things we wanted to emphasize and ask you to keep in mind is that in the quality assurance process, an instructor's performance in their discussions does not include any evaluation by us of the student's participation in those discussions. If an instructor is meeting those rubrics that Liz just talked about and providing a substantive discussion experience for the student, re-engaging them, acknowledging what they're saying, being present. If an instructor is doing those things that are called for in the QA rubric, that's what gets evaluated in the QA process, not whether the students are responding. If an instructor is doing all those things that the rubric calls for, then he or she is really putting the ball in the student's court, and it's up to the students to participate or not. And so it's important for us to make clear that the QA process that Liz and I are involved in does not include rating an instructor on how the student participates in the discussions. So as Liz mentioned at the outset, really our premise for this discussion today is that sometimes you might face a situation in your online discussions in which students are quiet, reluctant to post, not responding. And so the question then becomes, how do you cope? What do you do? What are some ideas that will help move the discussion along and at the same time also help you meet those QA rubric requirements? An interesting observation here from a teaching blog regarding online discussions. One of the reasons discussion so often fails or doesn't realize much of its potential is the absence of structure. The discussion might be too open-ended, or it wanders around and it's easily sidetracked. A structure can keep the discussion focused and on track. You know, if you have an algebra class and there's a discussion underway, and one student mentions, I couldn't get my homework done last night because my dog was sick, and then other students start chiming in with, I love dogs, and my dog is great. That's not really the structured format for your algebra discussion. And I have to agree with this observation that a structure is important to keep a discussion focused and on track for the topic that you want to cover in that unit's discussion. So at the opening of a discussion, let's say the first day or so of a unit's discussion, one idea that can lead to some more active participation in that discussion would be to let students choose their own questions to answer in the discussion. In the division that I'm currently the chair for, there is a course that uses this approach. One of our geography courses in the Cultural Sciences division has implemented a process whereby the instructor asks the students early on in the discussion to look through the text and choose some topics that they find interesting or that they don't know about and would like to know more about, that they would like to have as a discussion topic. And then the instructor will incorporate that into the discussion and develop a discussion question based on the student input. And this helps to keep that discussion rolling and be more productive because students themselves have participated in the process of selecting a discussion topic. Another idea at the start of a unit is to make a post just simply asking students what they've learned in the past about that subject. In addition to working on the QA team and being a chair, I also still teach courses at CCC Online. And so in a history class, I might start a discussion by saying, what do you recall about this unit's topic from your high school history or from any history courses you've had in the past? But again, it's an opening, something to prompt some more direct involvement from the student rather than only relying on the formal discussion question for that unit. Another option that's been used by some instructors is to divide the class into teams or groups and require that they have to take a certain position on a controversy and post it. So again, you can get more active involvement when there's an arrangement or a structure of this type. Along that same line, an instructor could, for example, form 3 teams, with the third team mediating the discussion. And one of the articles that we came across in the preparation of this presentation suggests that you could use a controversial but not quite as heated topic, such as this example that you see here. Parking lots on campus should be open to everyone with a valid parking permit. Not really an issue with CCC Online, but you see the point here of using a topic that would not be as potentially hot button as, you know, Obamacare or gun rights or something that would be a little more dramatic.
Okay, so moving right along here, those were some ideas for beginning your discussions, and we are, of course, aware that at CCC Online, you're teaching a course where there are generally already some fixed discussion topics there. And so some of these, keep in mind, are posts that you yourself can ask at the beginning or you know, as the discussion unfolds, to and one of the the points on the rubric is that the instructor should be appropriately sort of funneling the conversation, engaging, re-engaging, directing, redirecting, appropriately closing the topics. So some of these ideas, I think they can really work, or all of these ideas really can work even at CCC Online, where you're not making up the topics as you go along, but you actually have some direction and you're making some posts to enhance what's already there. So in the middle of the discussion, I thought this was a nice quote to keep in mind, again from a teaching blog. Let discussion flow, don't dominate, but enhance. And in reality, it's really a fine line to walk. One of the repeated questions that John and I have heard from instructors at webinars like this one is, I really don't want to overwhelm the students. I don't want to post too much. If I post too much, first of all, it might overwhelm the students and make them back off. And another thing is, I would like the students to think, and I'd like to give them a day or so to think about something. I don't want to jump right in and save them and give them the answers. And so we do recognize that, and I think that the rubric is flexible in that, because again, when you look at presence, it's that you're regularly posting 3 different days a week, and the timeliness is that you're usually responding to the post within 48 hours. So I just wanted to address that concern. I know it is often a concern that we do understand that you shouldn't dominate the discussion. But then again, if you're posting 3 different days within the week, you might post just 1 post on Monday, and then you post a few on Wednesday, and you post more on Friday. So we don't count and see, we don't count how many posts are made on each day. The important thing is that you're in there and you're engaging as is appropriate to that particular discussion. Okay, so here are just some ideas and some tips that you might use, similar to the points that John went over. And one is a standout idea. And I think, having taught, also John mentioned that he teaches, and I also certainly have taught online, and the things I have taught were English Comp and Introduction to Literature. And so in my case, what stood out to you as most interesting or challenging or difficult in this unit's reading? For instance, I know that students always have trouble, or they always say that they have trouble or that they don't like poetry. And so that's a real challenge for a lot of students, and they come in kind of with that bias from high school or other places. Well, poetry's hard, I don't get it, I don't understand it. And so I, as the instructor, maybe know that. And so that could be in my bag of tricks, that if the students are silent, I might assume, well, maybe they think this is really tough. So I might say, well, what's the toughest part about this? Or, so you could use this to try to tease that out of them, something that they maybe have difficulty with. Or, on the other hand, what's something that was just a wow moment? What's something that really struck you as interesting? And you can, of course, as John mentioned, this could go kind of afield with the example of the dog, and I love dogs, but again, you're in there and you're engaging and re-engaging and reining them back in. Another related idea is to have students name something, and this is assuming, of course, that you have some sort of assigned reading, maybe a textbook or lecture notes in the course, or maybe some video that they were assigned to watch. And if you'd like them to get talking about that, and so that your discussion is directly related to something that they're studying, and I've seen this at CCC Online, that it seems to me that some instructors ask this of their students, hey everyone, well, how can you relate that to the chapter that we're reading now, or a lesson from the last unit? And so I see a lot of this at CCC Online, but I think that's really effective. Can you quote something from the book that relates to this? And it's something that is really encouraging critical thinking, obviously. If the students are really reticent and quiet, and it's 3 or 4 days into the discussion, and I think we've probably all been there, some things you can do to gently nudge the students. One is, here's an example of a successful post. And of course, you could save a successful post and just keep it in a Word document and hold it up as an example. Or if a student within that class has made a successful post, you could just simply refer, hey everyone, check out Kevin's post, and this is really outstanding, and this is really what I'm looking for. It's meeting all the requirements and it's exceeding, etc. And another thing that you could do is just simply make a reminder post. Hey everyone, you're pretty quiet. Please don't forget that you do have a deadline tomorrow. Don't forget to make your post. And however, you know, everyone has a different style on how you relate to and talk to your students, but there certainly is nothing wrong with, if your students are quiet, jumping into the discussion and posting and just asking them to post. Another approach here, and this really, I've done this because my students, if you're teaching writing online, generally the students are constantly working on some essay. You know, either they're in the brainstorming stages or the outlining stages of the draft or something. Other classes may have maybe not essays, but projects, labs, etc. And so only if this is appropriate to the discussion, you could have students volunteer an excerpt from their work and ask a burning question, and then keep that as a little reference board for the students. And I've found that this has been very useful to me when I've taught essays in which the students have to incorporate sources. And a lot of times students are, they really don't understand, or they need some help with quoting correctly, you know, when to quote, when to paraphrase, and how to use MLA style citations. So instead of having them post the whole paper, I've had them just, hey everyone, pick out a paragraph in which you have used a direct quote and ask a question about it. And they seem to like this because they can kind of relax, and the assignment is to ask, right? So they can kind of relax and, yeah, I really don't know. You know, they may ask something about the quotation marks themselves, or is this paraphrase enough from the original? And so we can really get some useful lessons out of that kind of question. And you just leave it up to the students. What's your burning question about this assignment? And I found that it's effective to just a short excerpt seems to work really well. And then that's, again, an example for everyone. Okay, so this one is, I'll specifically show you the next slide here is a picture from Wordle.net. And I'm sure that there are other Web 2.0 tools that you might use in your own classes already, and we'll certainly ask you about that. But one idea is, since we're talking basically about text in this presentation, that you take, you make a Wordle and you create a Wordle. I'll go ahead and show you a picture. This is a Wordle that I created from just the discussion that Sean posted, just the, just the description that Sean posted about this particular webinar. So a Wordle will take all the words, and if a word shows up more than once, it either prints it more than once, or maybe that word shows up in a bigger font. And so I've done this before by just taking a little time out, and I maybe put together several student posts, and I compile them and I put them feed them into the Wordle, and Wordle will make their words into a little picture, and then you can ask students something to comment on that. So that's just an idea. Again, if you're stuck and you'd like to kind of freshen things up a little bit. Another idea is to offer new material midstream. And this is very much in keeping with the QA rubric. One of the categories is additional posts. And the best practice there is that the instructor regularly adds additional information and directs or redirects the discussion or appropriately closes it. So certainly a lot of times instructors will simply remind the students of the lessons in the last unit or something that they've already learned, or hey, what you said is a great point, and it reminds me of, you know, some other concept that you'd like them to tie together. But you can also offer some material, hey everyone, and I see this frequently when I look at different people's classes. Hey everyone, I just saw a great TV show that covered this topic, or I read something on the internet, and let me know what you think. You post something. And so this is helpful when you do have that class, the same basic class, same shell every semester, and you're looking for ways for your own benefit, frankly, but also for the students to keep that classroom fresh. Offering new material is good for that. You might offer a link to a video, a quotation, or a picture and ask students about it. And then the quote from one of the sources that we used is that you can add new details to which students must respond. And I know at least some of the courses I've seen in the CTE department, the assignment is actually that the students have to frequently check into the discussion because the questions which they must answer actually change. The professor is posting new questions on different days of the week. So that's something else to think about. And I wanted to mention to you that on our library resources page, Mary Cash, our instructional online librarian, did compile a really nice list of open educational resources. So just keep that in mind. That's on our website. You can check that out and perhaps find some sources. Again, when your discussion is getting a little slow and you're casting about how can I breathe a little fire into it, you might just check this out and have a few resources in your back pocket that you can drop into discussion as needed. Let's see. I have a question. Will you email us this presentation? And I believe that I can do that, first of all. That's not a problem. I think perhaps we might put that on our webinar archives, but we can ask Sean about that. But thank you for that question. And regardless, even if we don't put it on the archives, I'm happy to email it to you and to whomever would like to see it. Okay, I think at this point, I'll go ahead and hand the mic over to John again.
And let me be sure again that I'm coming through.
You are, John. And just to jump in and answer that question, we are recording this webinar, so it will be available on our archives for you guys to view at your convenience.
Thanks, Sean. Some sample prompts here, as you see on this screen, things that you could be saying to the student to move along a discussion that maybe has bogged down a little bit. Again, these are questions that really can fit almost anywhere in a discussion. You know, the second day of a discussion or toward the end of a discussion. We've broken up our presentation into, the opening of a discussion, the middle part, and the ending. But anytime things are dragging, it could be useful to get things energetic again, to say to a student in response to their post, what are you assuming? Or asking a student, could you explain further? What is your main point? Give us an example. There's a very helpful post to make, which, as many of these questions do, does sort of put the ball back in the student's court. If you're saying, give us an example, then the student, to continue that discussion, has got to come through with something. And if they don't, remember what we mentioned at the outset, that instructors at CCC Online are not evaluated on to what extent the students are responding. Our job as instructors is to get those good, re-engaging, acknowledging, questioning posts out there. And so these are some good samples of ones that can lead to some further discussion in a quiet discussion. This is an interesting one that we would suggest to you. Share some contrasting quotations and ask students to respond, either agreeing, disagreeing, or finding some middle path between the two. For example, I teach history classes. I could make a post saying, Professor XYZ has said this and this about the Mexican War, but historian ABC has offered the theory that this happened. Obviously, everyone, these are contrasting opinions. What do you think about this? What have you read? What do our studies in this unit lead you to think about this issue? Once again, questions that put the ball back in the student's court. This certainly can work too. The famous aha moment, asking students at various points throughout the discussions. When did this become clear to you? What was a moment during our studies in this unit when the concept we are examining made sense to you? And then the closing of discussions. One very easy way to prompt some observations is to make a post in which you are asking students what they've learned from the discussion or from the material being studied in that unit, or asking for further reflection on that material. You could make a post saying, tell us all something you didn't know previously about this topic, which you've learned in this unit. I like this. This would be a good way to have a student really concentrate their thought on the material or the issue from that unit, asking them to summarize their thoughts or knowledge in like a brief bumper sticker type message.
I just wanted to mention really quickly also, John, that Mary Cash and I were talking the other day about summary skills and how students across the curriculum, I think, often you might assume that they can read an article and easily summarize it, but that's not always the case, picking out the thesis and the main points. If you've taught English, that's probably apparent to you, but even if you haven't, that may be something that you may or may not have noticed. But if you ask them to summarize, to try to get the main idea down to a bumper sticker message, it's a real challenge. And I know before I've also used Netflix, where I've asked students to look up their favorite movies on Netflix, and they know the story, and then I point out, well, this whole entire, the conflict and the major leading actors and something to draw you in. Of course, the whole summary isn't there because they're not giving away the ending, but they have an impressive amount of material that they have managed to tell you in a few sentences, and so those kinds of things where you force students to be very pithy. I think bumper sticker is in the spirit of that, but that's another a really challenging thing for students, but I think it's something that helps them with their writing skills as well.
And it also would give the instructor the opportunity to add some more to the discussion. If a student's bumper sticker type summary is off base or really is not summarizing the real essence of what was studied in that unit, there's an opportunity for the instructor to come back in and to say, remember, Susie, the important message in this unit was the approaching tensions that would lead to the Civil War. To give the instructor an opportunity to come back in to say something further, which of course adds to the discussion.
At this point, we would like to ask you all for similar tips and tricks that you've used in your own discussions. Of course, if you have any questions about any of this, we welcome that as well. So Sean mentioned that the Q&A window is a good place for that, or if you do have your microphone and you'd like to use it, please feel free to do that. So we'll just sit back and see what kind of input we get from all of you.
Use your microphone. If you can just click on that hand raise button right there, and we can unmute you so you can do that talk with us. And we do have a question from Mary here who asks, what do we do when students only post on the weekend?
That's a really good question, Mary, and I think one thing just to back up and talk about the rubric and the expectations of each individual discussion, I've noticed that it can be extremely helpful when students actually have figured into their grade that they need to post once by, say, Wednesday, and then they need to come in and post again, maybe 2 times or 3 times, however you'd like to do that, by Friday. And what I see quite a lot when I look at courses is that students many times do wait until the very last minute, and they post perhaps the deadline is Sunday night, and they all get on and post maybe Saturday, but usually Sunday. I say all, it's not all the students, but a pretty big block of them. And so I think one thing that you can do to kind of mitigate that is to actually have a rubric that would basically encourage the students to post separate times of the week so that that doesn't happen. As John has mentioned a couple of times, we are not, you know, our QA reports are not looking at what the students are or are not doing. So if the students are all posting on the weekend, it wouldn't be a penalty to you if you are, of course, you maybe can only respond to them once they post. We understand that. But keep in mind that the timeliness of your responses, there has to be a student post before you can respond to it. So if the students all post on the weekend, as long as you're in there and you're responding to them within those 48 hours, that would be fine. And also, even if the students are only posting, let's say, on the weekend, if you are in the discussion at least 3 different days a week and you are trying to get the discussion rolling as best you can, then, of course, that's what we would look at. I'll see if John has anything more to add to that.
Yeah, kind of an extreme example of that might be, let's say a discussion is scheduled to run for 2 weeks, and you know, students have only posted on, let's say, Saturday and Sunday of the first week. Now you're into the Monday through Friday portion of the week, and if literally no one was posting, you could make a post on Monday which responds to, let's say, one of the students who posted on Saturday and Sunday. On Tuesday, you could come back and make a post saying, hey everyone, here's a fascinating book I'd like to let you all know about that pertains to our topic this week. On Wednesday, if they still literally no one is making any posts, you could go back in and make a post that says something like, remember that for a good grade in the discussions, you need to make your initial post by this date, and you need to do follow-up posts by this date. You now have posted on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so you're meeting the presence requirement for the QA rubric, even if literally no one is posting. This kind of gets back to the point we've emphasized. You're doing your bit. You're doing what is required of you.
Exactly. I completely agree with that. And our hope is that during this presentation that perhaps you're able to take away some ideas either from each other or from our discussion that might help you with that when you have that dilemma of, I've done everything I can possibly do and the students just are not responding. You know, here's some things that you could toss out there and experiment. You know, just experiment with them, and perhaps some of them will work better for you and for your particular subject. I have a couple of comments that have come in on the Q&A board that I'd like to read and just perhaps comment on. And Casey says that she asked students to write a synopsis of what they learned that week. I assign them at the start of the semester so they know when to expect their turn. They see themselves as a proctor during their week, and they're very invested in the discussion that week. I think that's an excellent idea. Something that I'd like to add to that is that in the QA rubric, there's a question. This is an observation. This is not, if you don't do this, you're not getting an in or a no, but you're not getting an in, as in needs improvement, I'm sorry. You're just getting a yes or a no, and a no is not the same thing as an in. So it's just a simple observation, but something we do observe on the report is whether or not the instructor is posting a discussion summary. But the wording of that rubric, the rubric wording actually is instructor or assigned learner posts a discussion summary. So something you might try is what Casey's doing is that you assign a student to post a summary. And I used to do something similar in my English Intro to Lit classes where I'd have a weekly leader, and there would be a group of 3 weekly leaders, and sometimes that got a little bit unwieldy when one weekly leader dropped out of the class and so on. I'm sure you all have had similar experiences. But overall, I was surprised that the students really did step up to the plate, and they did overall, even the students who maybe weren't as enthusiastic other weeks, they really took it seriously when, hey, you're the weekly leader, you need to post some prompts and some questions to get us going this week. So thank you so much for that comment. And I had another one. I have a few more. Randall says, I tell the students at the start they need to post within the first 3 days that the discussion opens. Thank you. I think that's another great idea. Perhaps even if it's not in your rubric, or if it is, it never hurts. I always find that you know, repeating information. You've taught the class a lot, and you know what the rules are, and sometimes I think, and I include myself in this, you know, I assume that the students know what I'm looking for, and of course they know what the rubric says because the rubric's right there and they can print it out and look at it, but they don't necessarily know that, and so sometimes reminding them every single discussion is useful. And Kevin Murray says, in my AMP class, our discussions are only 4 to 5 days long. These are preset by the department. In addition, 2 of those days may be a Saturday and Sunday. Any thoughts? And I will, I'll see if you're probably tired of hearing me talk, so perhaps John would like to address that one.
Am I still on?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay. When we're doing QA review, and you know, the QA rubric talks about number of posts per week, most discussions, in my experience thus far on the QA team, most discussions do run at least a week, some 2 weeks. But if a discussion runs for a shorter period of time, did the question say 4 days?
Yes, that's right. The AMP class, the discussion 4 to 5 days long, and 2 of the days may be a Saturday and Sunday. So that was the concern.
Okay. We would be, in the QA work, we would be looking at just the time period that discussions were actually scheduled for. So if it was 4 or 5 days, we would be looking at those 4 or 5 days to determine things like presence, and even if a discussion is only 4 or 5 days long, you still can meet the QA rubric requirements of things like asking re-engaging questions, acknowledging what students have said, adding new information to the discussion, and Liz, I'm trying to think of a time when one of our discussions that we were reviewing was that short and included 2 days of a weekend, which on weekends, we don't hold weekends against an instructor. If an instructor does not make posts on a weekend, that's not counted against them, so to speak.
Right. And I can't remember, you know, and what John's saying is exactly the case in that most of, yeah, I would agree, most of the discussions we see are a week or 2 weeks long, but sometimes we do see those really short discussions, and I don't think a 4 or 5 day discussion would be a hindrance to meeting those QA guidelines. I think one thing that you'd have to be mindful of is just that you do want to post 3 different days that week. So you may be in there posting more frequently than you would perhaps if the discussion were 2 weeks longer. And this is really a question of pedagogy, but I've read and heard some interesting things about what's the best approach, and that of course is up to the program chairs, and those decisions are out of our hands. But I've heard conflicting views, interesting views about what works best. Does a short discussion actually encourage better participation from the students, or is it better to have that conversation last a little longer? And perhaps it depends on the subject too. But those are questions that we don't that's up to the chair and the dean and how the course is designed. But I think overall, in answer to your question, if you have a really short discussion, you certainly could still hit all the points on the QA rubric and do a really nice job with that discussion.
Also, I don't want to miss Mary's follow-up question. She asked whether instructors are required to create a synopsis of each and every discussion. Using a closing summary statement at the end of a discussion is up to the chair. Some chairs want their instructors to do that at the end of each discussion. Other chairs don't care. So on the QA review, that's something we are required to look at, whether an instructor is making a closing summary comment at the end of each discussion. And so we just say yes or no. But if your chair doesn't want you to be doing that, obviously you're going to get a no in that category, but it won't be a problem for you with your chair because he or she is not requiring their instructors to make a closing summary post. So it's up to your department.
All right. Thank you, John. I'm going to look at another question for us. Oh, go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't miss Jim. He raised his hand a while back. He wanted us to pass the mic to him to ask a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we can go ahead and do that now if you want.
Cool. Thanks. Jim, unmuting you. Are you there?
I was ready to leave. I don't know if there's anybody else from the science division that is right now, and I think you're aware that the science division has set up specific types of discussions. I will admit I'm not really that enamored with all of them the way we do, but and there are topics that are exciting. Then they have to do an initial post on it and a secondary post. That has to be done within the first week. Then in the second week, they have to reply to these 2 classes. And they can't use I agree with you, no, when I post that. And also,
hey, Jim, we're getting some background noise there. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's just me. I was just trying to talk fast over you.
It sounds like there might be something rubbing against your microphone.
Oh, I'm using my laptop.
I'm also getting significant fading in and out of volume.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we heard you really clear when you first started talking to us, so I don't know if, however you were using your mic at that point, that was working really well.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Anyway, the same problem though we have is, even though all of these discussions have been set up with specific, and we use the same topics every semester, so that there's 4 discussions that they must use, that they must do, and they have to do, you know, the initial and the secondary post, and actually talk to their classmates within the first week. Many of them do not. In fact, they'll miss the first week and get into the second week. What I've gotten to is basically I just send emails to them reminding them that they're going to lose points. And then, you know, when you go to assess the discussion, I've essentially been keeping a running log of what they did or didn't do. So when they see that they got a 10 out of 25 or a 6 out of 25, they can read my comments right there and then why they did. That usually works for the first discussion, and by the second one, at least the better students are doing well. Like I've got a discussion that's going to be ending Monday, and some students haven't even made the first post at all from 2 weeks ago. A lot of my students tell me that they only can work on weekends, and so what happens is I'll look Monday morning and I've got 40 discussions to respond to, and I can't do a good job of responding to 40 discussions. So I just pick and choose which ones I think they've said something good, and I'm really looking to see if they're adding something that's not, how do we say this? I'm looking for if they post incorrect information that I need to correct, because I'm afraid that some students will walk away reading the last thing that a student said that was false, and they'll take that in with them to a test. I just wanted to get my 2 cents in on that.
Great.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point, and I'm sure that a lot, and thank you so much for your comments. I'm sure that others have the same experience where students tend to post maybe all on the weekend or all at the same time, and then you are faced with all of a sudden a whole lot of posts to respond to, and depending on your style, one of our instructors do is simply 5 or 6 students who are basically making the same point. You can certainly address those students as a group, and that's actually even addressed on the QA rubric, which a best, for example, in interaction quality is that the instructor is regularly interacting with the students both on an individual and a group basis. And so one way that you can meet that best is just, I guess one thing that you can do is, if the students have been assigned to read all the posts, you can assume that they are reading the posts. And I know some instructors say, well, I know they don't read the other posts, so I try to answer each of them individually. But I think a discussion really should be something that the students should be reading. And if they're not, that's nothing, you only have limited control. And again, we don't hold that against you. But I think it's more efficient for you, it's not as much of a headache, and it really works well for QA if you can address groups of students in that scenario.
Right, and another way to do well in that interaction category that Liz was just talking about is maybe to make brand new posts, which are addressed something like, everyone, what's a real life example of how this concept works in our daily lives? And I'm just throwing that out there. But another way to ensure that you're doing well in the interaction category, which asks for interaction with individual students and with the whole group, is to make some new postings that are not an answer to something a student has said, but are new and are addressed everyone or to the whole class, things like that.
Right, I see those sometimes where an instructor will pin them to the top of a discussion and sometimes even say, please read, everyone please read, I'd like you to answer this. So it kind of catches the student's attention. There's a question here from Candace. I may have missed this, but is it useful and okay for QA to post, for QA, for us to post CCC Online or course requirements during the week in the discussions, or is that a distraction from the topic? Well, one thing that we do, one thing that we do see, and I think that would be a useful and practical thing to do, is to remind the students of the requirements for that discussion and to remind the students of the deadlines for that discussion. And I think one way that a lot of people keep track of sort of the housekeeping things and the course requirements would be to have a special discussion for that, like a water cooler, or some instructors even have a discussion board for class announcements, and of course you use the news announcements for that, but there may be some specific things you want to say in the discussion. So, and by the way, we do not look at the water cooler type discussions because for QA we're looking at the instructor-led discussion, so the sort of major meat and potatoes discussions that you have. Those are the ones that we will review. But I would say that's up to you. If you feel like it's useful to make an announcement within the discussion and it's pertinent to what you're talking about, I don't think that would be a valid post, I think. There's a comment from Erin. When I notice late posts from students close to the deadline, I sometimes make a comment saying, I'm glad you participated before the discussion closed. And, you know, thank you so much for mentioning that. I see that, and it's just so interesting. I feel like I know the personalities of a lot of people whose classes I review, even though, of course, I've never met them, because sometimes they, you know, they're just very, very nice in the way that they will say, well, I'm so glad that you could join us. Next time, you might want to think about posting a little bit earlier so everyone can benefit from your insightful remarks. And so those kinds of things you can say as kind of the gentle nudge to get students a little bit more, you know, get them to post in a more timely fashion perhaps next time. But I think acknowledgement is a good thing. Acknowledging all those posts, even if you do it in a group post, you know, name all the students in one post. Hey, everyone, thanks for your comments. Next time, perhaps consider posting this earlier so other students have time to respond. And let's see. I'm looking for other questions.
Me too.
So Emily has one. Do you have suggestions for making group posts? I write new questions for all, but I have a difficult time grouping students together for a question. When and why would you respond to a specific group of people?
Something that I will do sometimes is if several students have essentially said the same thing, which as we know definitely can happen in a discussion, then I might make a post which is titled something like Susie, Joe, Bob, and Larry. And then in the body of my post, I might say, you all touched on the interesting element of Jefferson's second administration, and then I can go on from there. So if several students have essentially said the same thing, I might address all of them in a group. But many other times, I don't even worry about breaking it down to a specific subgroup of students. I will just make posts which say, everyone, new findings on the New Deal, or a post that says, to the whole class, and then ask a question or adds information.
And sometimes I see, too, and I think this is effective, Emily, if you have students who, sometimes you have a very chatty class. It's kind of the opposite of the quiet scenarios we're talking about. But sometimes you have students who like to talk a lot. Perhaps sometimes they go off on a tangent. But I have seen instructors jump in, and perhaps there are 3 students participating in a heated discussion in a certain thread. and I've seen instructors jump in and just make some comment about, hey, you know, you all have some great thoughts. Have you thought about this? Or keep it up, or just to let the students know that you're there and you're facilitating, and you hear them and you appreciate their, you know, contributing. And so I've seen that too, is just making a group post a simple acknowledgement.
A question from Candace up here that I didn't mark as answered because I wasn't sure if you had gotten to that one, about whether or not it's okay or useful to post requirements during the week in the discussion. Did you guys get to that one?
Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize if that wasn't clear though. So let us know if that wasn't answered in a satisfactory way. That answers your question.
No, I think I just missed marking it. So.
Okay. Okay, great. I see Mary Brown has a question or a comment. I have the students post on Thursday or before with the original post. If they do not, they lose 1 point per day. Yeah. This helps to keep students from all posting on the weekend. You know, I've found in this to be true is that one thing that students really understand is when points are attached, frankly, to their grade. And so if they know that it's very interesting to me, even if, and I don't know, Mary, what your total points are, but in my experience, if it's 1 point out of, you know, 2,000 in the class, they still get anxious about it and they'll say, oh, I don't want to lose a point. You know, so sometimes that is a very good incentive.
I'm not sure which order we're currently in for the questions, but I like Emily's. And Emily asked about whether it's okay to voice personal opinions when students get into a controversial discussion or debate. And two thoughts come to mind, and then Liz, please add on to this. For my own classes, I've always made it a practice to not express my personal opinions. And I teach history and political science, and where there can be some strong opinions that students come to the class already holding. I always have made it a point to not express my personal opinion because I don't want any students in the course to think, oh, that's the direction I need to go now to please the instructor. I need to always be conservative in my comments or liberal, you know, whatever it might be. That's just me. But beyond that, remember that in the QA process, we would not be judging or evaluating whether you are expressing personal opinions. We're strictly looking at those rubric categories of, you know, engagement and presence, etc. And so we would not be judging an instructor on that. And I would suggest talking with the chair of your department about that issue and to see if he or she has any opinions about which way to go.
Yeah, I second everything John said, and personally, in my experience too, especially if I've assigned a paper where students have to debate an issue, you know, an English comp, or they have opposing viewpoints, I would be reluctant to give my opinion just because I would not want it to shut down further discussions if the students think, oh, okay, well, that's been settled. So I keep out of it myself. However, I completely agree. If you have a specific class in which you're wondering, would it be appropriate here or not? How should I handle this? That's a subject level decision that I would encourage you to talk to your chair about that. And again, no, we would not be, that would not enter into a QA report as to whether you're voicing personal opinions. Now, if you're re-engaging them with questions, if you're acknowledging their input, those are the things we're looking at. But whether or not you're voicing your opinions, I would say would be up to you, and you might talk to your chair about it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to Amy Draper's question. In math courses, students often reserve a problem and then don't submit their work until a week later. Rather than posting their work as a response to the reserve post, they edit their original, oh yes, then it looks like it took me over a week to respond. That is a really good question. And you know, I have seen that, Amy, in math courses where instructors will come on and say, please everyone, do not edit your original post. Now I might be wrong, but I think you might be able to set D2L the post so that students are not allowed to edit their post. Okay, so that could solve the problem, because you certainly don't want to, because I mean I could see that scenario where it looks like it took you over a week to respond, and we're looking at the dates, and so then that might count against you. So I would say the easiest solution to that problem would be to adjust the D2L settings. There might be something, another thing that you could do if that's happening and you feel like, oh my goodness, this is a problem, you could just simply write it into the post responding to the student explaining that, hey everyone, when you don't, because I think another problem is you don't necessarily have a flag on that to know when the student has edited it. It can just suddenly be edited. So it creates some problems. So if I were doing a QA report on a course like this and I saw the instructor talking about that issue, I would be mindful of that and take that into account as I'm looking at presence and timeliness. I hope we answered your question. You had a follow-up. How is that perceived by QA? You know, I would say, you know, our rubric does specify with the timeliness that the instructor is usually responding to students within 48 hours. And so if we can see that more easily within the post, that, you know, that's preferable. If you have some major issue with the editing, I would suggest, for your own sanity mostly, but also for possibly QA, to just maybe make it so that the students can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And Donna had a good comment. I respond with an acknowledgement post. If they edit their post, then I edit my post accordingly. That would be another way to, you know, you just acknowledge that they've posted something that day, and then you can go back to an edited version if that's appropriate. And Mary has a comment. Yeah, I asked students to edit posts by placing another post under the original and naming it corrections. I think that's a great tip as well.
Yes.
I had some comments. We had some in the chat from Denise, and this has been here for a while, so I apologize. It's in the chat window.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for catching those.
No, that's okay. I had that, and I just noticed there was something there. What if we set those interim dates, but there is not a grading rubric aspect that addresses it? There's no penalty for posting late, and thus they wait until the last minute. What if there's... Yeah, go ahead.
Something that comes to mind is that you could structure your discussion so that there is a penalty. In the discussion grading information, you could make a modification there and say initial post must be made by Wednesday of each week or at the loss of 2 points. But the instructor could make a modification to the discussion grading and of course talking with their chair.
Yeah, I think that would be a totally valid thing. Can I change the rubric? And
yes.
You know, I don't want to suggest that everybody go rogue and, you know, do things that you aren't supposed to do in your courses. However, I think it's a real problem, frankly, that it's not just about the QA reports, but it also is about the quality of the discussion. The quality of the discussion is diminished significantly when, you know, 2/3 of the class, and that would be an extreme, but 2/3 of the class are making their posts, which might be insightful, good posts. They're making them all at one time, and that's really defeating the purpose of a good discussion. So I would say it would be really advantageous for you, if you're seeing that as a problem in your classes, to be able to, as John suggested, you know, assign points to posting a certain day and then posting another day. And certainly that's something that I would encourage you, again, to talk to your chair about, but I see that as a quality of class issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and you know, you wouldn't be changing the total. If the discussion is worth 10 points, it's still going to be worth 10 points. But you're just saying if the main post isn't made by X day of the week, that's a loss of a point or two.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's a good point. The real purpose for the interim days is the quality. Absolutely, because, you know, sometimes students, as we know, they don't necessarily have the insight to understand that you know, those due dates are for their benefit and that's good for them. And I know we had a pretty popular post, one of our CCC Online training staff who isn't here any longer, but she posted about due dates, DUE dates are not due dates, DO dates. And I know that's something that she told her students, and that was really popular, and people really liked that and used that in their class, used that phrase. But I still think that you can encourage students, you tell them why it's important for them to post early, but I think what they really, bottom line, some of them will really respond to is if it's part of their grade.
Right, and you would not want to change the rubric in the sense of, for example, total points. If every other section of that class has a total of 1,000 points, let's say, an individual instructor would not want to change their rubric so that their course now has a total of 1,200 points or 800 points. Mm-hmm. But for the purpose of this specific discussion point and trying to get discussions rolling and get initial posts made, you're not changing the total number of points for the discussion. Like I was mentioning, it's still worth 10 points. But an instructor can contact their chair and say, how about, you know, if I assign a couple of points to having the main post made by Wednesday? Still the same number of points, just a different treatment of that first main post.
And you could really pitch that as this is an experiment to see if I get better results in my discussion if I do this. And then if you do, you know, perhaps it's something that that more people might wish to change about their own courses, because we do see that in QA. Sometimes I see a discussion that's sort of lopsided where I look at a big group of students and they're all posting the same day. And then I look at the content, I look at the schedule, and I see, well, that's the due date. And so certainly you're not alone if you're experiencing that. And I know that applies to quite a few classes, actually.
And so in the QA reviews that I've been doing, I've noticed that several instructors have decided to use that D2L function whereby a student cannot see any posts until they make their first main post.
So that might be another trick you might be able to use, and again, talk with your chair. But I've seen that too, and I think that's really interesting. I haven't used that kind of a tool personally, but I can certainly see the benefits, because some discussions encourage students to go out and find information and post their thoughts and original work, and so I could see an advantage to, you know, you post yours first and then you can read the rest. So that's another thing to work about, to think about. And I want to see if we have any other questions, but I don't see any in the wings right now. Let me know if there are.
Yeah, it looks like we've hit all of them.
I think so.
In the chat and in the QA there.
A good group.
Very good.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all of your thoughts and questions, everyone. Yeah, and you mentioned that discussion setting about students requiring students to post before they can read other posts. I know that was something that was really well received and everybody was excited about. It was a new feature that came in. the previous version of D2L that we upgraded to. And that's something that I started using in all of my discussions, and I think it definitely helps promote originality, just like you said. Even if they don't have to go out and find some information to share, just in general, I've seen that it kind of promotes originality in their posts, which is pretty cool.
That's a great tip, Sean. That's really interesting. Well, I'll see if there are any other questions. I think this was scheduled until 2:30, I think.
Looks like Judy just raised her hand.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Judy, do you have a question for us that you'd like to give to us through your mic? Okay, it looks like Judy's question is in the chat here.
Okay.
Oh, okay, so is that, looks like she's asking if the questions that the classes that she teaches requires that discussions are researched following specific guidelines for analysis. Do you see that question in there, John?
I actually don't. No.
I'm not seeing it. Did you say it's in Q&A or chat?
Oh, I'm sorry. I can see it now. Here, that one was sent privately to me, so what I'll do is I'll post that back in the chat right now so that everybody can see it.
Okay. Any suggestions for guiding students who post that don't fulfill the requirements?
That's a good question, not necessarily a QA type question, but anyone still online here in the meeting who might want to offer some suggestions on helping a student understand that although they posted, they're not fulfilling the full requirements of the assignment.
Whenever I've encountered that, you mentioned something about it before, you know, somebody posts late, making sure to say thanks for their post before you tell them do it earlier next time. I've done that when I've seen students who didn't necessarily meet the question. I make sure to acknowledge what they did right if it was incorrect or wasn't enough before, you know, maybe even just rephrasing the question sometimes gets them to write something new, but I think that acknowledging what they did put is important, at least for me.
Thanks, Sean. There's a couple of responses here. Roxy, I emailed a student to explain it in detail rather than in the discussion. And I know what I see sometimes to that point is in a discussion, I will see an instructor say, thanks, Sally, please check your email.
Exactly.
So, yeah, and what I have found is that sometimes, well, obviously, I guess, students who are struggling aren't necessarily logging in much. They're not necessarily reading a discussion much. They're not necessarily checking their email. So you know that they've posted, and they might actually read something that you wrote in response to the post. So I think that's perfectly fair to go ahead and send them that private message so that it's not in front of everybody. But I don't think there's anything wrong with asking the student to check their private email, even in a discussion. It might be the only time that you're reaching that student.
And for me personally, in classes that I teach when this happens, I put my comments in the grading of the discussions, where I will say to the student, you know, to avoid losing points unnecessarily, please be sure to XYZ. And so my comments about it are right in the grading comments.
I think that's really helpful. There's something in the chat that I think is along the same lines from Amy Draper. I will sometimes say to the student, you did a great job on your post. Please make sure to add blank to your post so that you will receive full credit. We'd hate to miss out on your full input.
Right.
I like that. And then there's a couple of other tips here. Amy, I either remind them about the missing requirements or ask them to go and review the rubric. And Linda says, I sometimes provide feedback about how the grade might be improved when I am grading. Again, you know, I really don't think it is ever a problem. I have never looked at a class at CCC Online and I've never thought to myself, oh my, this instructor is not being tactful with handling, you know, whether or not the student is on the right track. I think it's almost a universal, really, that I think instructors are very careful about that, and they're not going to be posting grades out in the discussion. But I think just a gentle little reminder and nudge and those kinds of things are perfectly appropriate. Well, that may be. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, okay, Jim. That is a suggestion. I copy everything I put in the discussion assessment and in the Dropbox and send that as an email. It does two things: more opportunity for the student to view it, and since when students drop, all comments disappear, I have a record. That's an interesting idea too. I think posting, you know, we've probably all heard that posting, if something's really important, you're probably going to post it in several places, maybe in the news and maybe in an email and maybe, you know, some other way. And so I think basically backing up, it looks like backing up your comments in an email, and that's a good suggestion that might work for you.
Yeah, that's going the extra mile.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else have comments, questions?
Yeah, go ahead and put them in the Q&A panel or the chat panel. We have a few minutes left. We're almost at our mark there. But if that's it, we really appreciate you guys coming, and thanks so much for all the great questions. I know that the QA team appreciates those questions, as do everybody else who came today. It's great to have other people ask things that we may not think about. So your participation is appreciated.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah, I second that, and thank you very, very much for coming, and especially for your comments and suggestions for each other. I think that's really great to see.
And if you have any other questions, you know, like was mentioned a few times, some of that stuff is specific to your department, so you might want to ask that question to your chair. But if there's anything general about QA, I know that the QA team would be happy to answer those questions for you as well. And do you guys have a QA team email, Liz and John?
We do not have a general QA team email. I have to think about getting one, but you could email us directly, me or John, either one.
Sure. If you guys don't mind, you want to just put your emails in the chat? Sure. I'm sure that they're easy to find in the Outlook address book, but. So in the chat or in the Q&A? Actually, that's a good question. I don't know if everybody can see it in the chat. Oh, yeah, they should be able to see that. That'll work. Let's see. Let me get mine up here. Thanks for doing that. Sure. So as I mentioned before, this is recorded, so it'll be available on our archive. It should be up by, I would say, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest of next week. So you can come back and review anything at any time. And thanks again for coming, everybody. Thanks so much again to John and Liz for the great material and taking the time to do this for all of us. Sure thing. All right. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Yes, have a nice weekend, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.